Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. Luke Hart here, board geek, pro surfer, pro golfer, shout out Travis Matthew. You know, all round nice guy I guess. Looking forward to the spring. Some signs of it, some early signs of some sun coming out. A couple of waves today as well to be had, which I'm quite excited for after having a few days off. Anyway, today I wanted to touch on I guess it's slightly contentious subject, but basically this is just about information on channels. What do they do, where they work best, and should you be thinking about channels in your next surfboard? A lot of information out there about channels to me seems quite iffy and hard to fully understand. So I thought we should try and break it down into types of channels, what exactly they're doing versus not having them on the same board, how they feel under the feet, which fin setups work best with them, why they aren't as novel as sometimes they are deemed to be. There's three main types of channels. One being tail exit channels, which means these are channels that start in varying different places on a surfboard and exit the tail. The next is belly channels, which are channels in the central part of the board that don't exit the tail or the rail. And then there's central channels used more in terms of bottom shape, so like extreme concave, but these can be kind of called channels as well. So we're going to go through each type of channel and what they're doing. So we'll start with the more classic design of the tail channel. Now these usually come in pairs, so 2, 4, 6, 8. I think there's some crazy 10 channel bottoms for free flight boards in Australia, which are single fin mental ones. We've had them in the factory before. Channel placement, what does more channels give you? Essentially, more channels on a board are going to give you a bigger extreme of the differences that channel makes to the board. So 2 channels is going to do the same thing as 4 channels, but 4 channels is going to do that thing a little bit more. It also elaborates the high point. So if you put a channel either side of the stringer and you make it really, really deep, it's going to create almost a fin-like V inside those channels. So the deeper you go with the channel, the more pronounced that V is going to be. And what that's doing is that's going to give you some concentrated water, so water flowing that's being directed by the channel, shooting out the back. So if you imagine the more pressure, the accentuated water generation through the channels and that concentrated water flowing through the tail is giving you effectively a bit more down the line speed, especially if you put weight on your back foot. If you engage those channels, you're going to squeeze more water down and shoot out the back. So it's almost like an acceleration. And so some people will say, well, okay, well, why wouldn't you always have channels if they just make the board faster? Because they also slow you down. Every time that you are going downhill on a wave, your channels are going to be adding lift and directional force so that you're going to be really, really nicely connected to the water with lots of speed and drive. As soon as you turn on your inside rail and start crossing down the line and going back up, the water flow is going across the channels, and the channels are going to be adding some hold, some friction against that water. The water is going almost like little brakes, just like fins. They're tiny little mini fins effectively. So a really nice balance is having channels with less fins. So that's why you see a lot of twin pin with channel setups on the market, because if you do exactly the same board but have it as a thruster, you might have a little bit too much drag in slower paced waves. And if you have exactly the same board but with no channels, you might not quite have enough hold through rail transitions, especially in good waves. So you tend to see that the channels are helping, giving you some drive down the line and then some kind of help with pivot from rail to rail transitions, allowing you to have less fin and less drag in that fin, so it gives more of a free flowing kind of fluid board. Why I would have tail channels on, say, this board here, is if I was using it for more powerful down the line waves, I would want to lean on this board whilst it's going quite fast and trust that I'm not going to slide out, or I can take a more critical line. So the channels are going to help me have forward drive down the line and then a little bit more hold, given the fact that I'm only riding it as a twin fin. And a lot of people like the fluidity of channel bottom twin fins in those better waves. Then why I wouldn't have channels on a board like this, for me, is in average waves. When the waves aren't offering you lots and lots of speed, and I want to generate a little bit more speed and maybe hop the board around a little bit, I think the channels can often, as you're going from rail to try and engage your own speed and make the most out of a slopey wave, they can drag a little bit, and they can make an otherwise loose fin setup, which is a lovely feeling in the twin fin. They can make that almost feel stiff, and that's boring. It makes it feel a bit boring. So sometimes channel bottoms on beach breaks and kind of onshore, like rubbish slopey waves, it can dull your ride a little bit, whereas it can really come into its own when the waves are more powerful. They're not essential on every board that's a twin fin at all, and it's something that you want to be wary of, because I think there's some shapes out there where they've got a channel because it looks pretty, and people say, well, do they do anything? Well, yeah, they do something, and it might be detrimental. It might be a bonus, but for sure, as soon as you put channels in, if you haven't got the right total setup in mind, with thought and consideration for the fact that the board's going to have channels, you might find that it works in a smaller range of conditions. So to me, channels have to make sense along the whole rest of the line of the surfboard. Otherwise, you're just basically boxing it into where it's going to feel nice on certain surfs and certain waves. Now, the other set of channels that you'll see quite often is what they're called belly channels. And belly channels tend to sit in the center of the rocker somewhere, or just above the fin somewhere, kind of in that remit there. If you've got a lot of rocker in a board and then you cut belly channels into the middle, what you're doing is you're maintaining the curve on the rail of that original rocker, and basically the whole board. But everywhere you've put a channel, you're putting flat in, you're flattening that, and the flatness of those channels can add forward drive by board connection on your front foot, so you can drive off your front foot a little bit more. So it helps with initial lift and squirt. So belly channels can be really, really nice on either waves where you've got your board set up with not very much pivot and you want an extra bit of lift to maintain speed for a turn on a longer faced wave, like somewhere like a point break, or if you want to accentuate tighter turning radiuses in smaller waves and maintain power. So this is quite technical now, but this is for a really good surfer who's really good at generating their speed. If you put belly channels on their board and allow them to get a little bit more air and lift and sort of down the line drive, so they can generate max speed, they can then utilize that extra rocker and that curve in their outline to do a tighter, whippier turn and maintain speed through it. Belly channels do work quite nicely as a bit of a technical cheat code into having one board down the line and another board on rail. When used correctly, channels are brilliant, but they can't just be slapped on anything, and I do see that quite a lot. Another way they can be used is in the more sort of modern aspect of design, where we're going shorter, wider, slightly, and trying to utilize kind of flatter, shorter boards. They have those kind of, like the Tomo, and Kelly's been playing a lot with them. They're kind of like middle channels. What these effectively are doing is they're taking board out of the water when you're on rail, so you've got less point of contact. So you are going faster with little resistance when you're doing your turn, but they haven't taken any of the other part of the design away. So the theory is that you're holding your power through the turn on shorter distances that are then easier to manipulate in those tighter pockets. And I do love these concepts, but they are sometimes easy to get wrong as well if you put them on something too wide, if you put them on something with too much bank on the side in between the channels. With width and flatness, you end up with basically the rail doesn't properly engage unless you're completely committed, which sometimes of course you can't be completely committed if you're not surfing really, really good waves that are allowing you lots and lots of speed. So they're tricky to get right, and I would say that they definitely aid the performance of a better surfer, but could quite easily detriment a lesser surfer in weaker waves. It's a case of making sure you're marrying up the design to your waves, to the surfer, to make sure that you accentuate where those channels come into play and are beneficial. Because if you don't do that, you end up with a board that's brilliant, but in a small window of surf, which is usually your perfect days when a lot of boards feel quite good. You'd rather have it working in your everyday surf wherever you live, whether that's, in my case, a tidal beach break, or someone else's case, it could be, you know, a reef break that's offshore every morning, or, you know, someone on the North Shore of Hawaii. We're all going to want slightly different go-to everyday boards, and if we have channels involved in those areas and it as our everyday equipment, we want to make sure that the rest of the board's set up for it, and it's not just a case of, oh, I wanted some pretty channels. So I hope that's helped explain it. I'll go through it really quickly again. Tail channels will, God, this is hard to explain. I hope I'm doing it justice, because I feel like I'm making sense to myself, but I might be chatting absolute rubbish to you. Let me know in the comments and I'll try and go over it again. Tail channels add hold to looser boards, usually twin fins, but not always the case. Add control through wider arcing turns, and they work best in clean, powerful surf. Essentially, it's what any bottom shape on a surfboard is doing. It's trying to offer you the best balance of speed, control of that speed, and pivot. And bottom shapes aid the rest of your board doing that. Fins, bottom shape, rails, rocker, it all interconnects to offer those best balances. And when we find a magic board, it basically means that without thinking, we're doing what we want. And channels can for sure be a part of that. So don't be put off them, but at the same time, be wary of them. Make sure your shaper knows what he's doing. Make sure that you know what you're ordering and what you're ordering it for. And although they are beautiful to look at, aesthetics don't always mean a better surf. Maybe a red resin tint gloss and polish does, but other than that, I hope this has helped. It's been, my head hurts now, to be honest with you. I can kind of feel Teeps in the background about to ask me a question as well. Yeah, so like, comment, subscribe. Thank you for watching. More content, more surfing content coming really soon. We've got some of our new models that we've done videos on, and some better pilots. Pedestrian ship, coming soon. So yeah, cheers guys. Peace and love. Go get wet. Bye. Go on then.
I was just saying, is it worth mentioning like how Love Machine, Ryan Lovelace uses channels for release as opposed to an edge which water is coming off and therefore reducing drag? Because you look at the pedestrian ship, I reckon you've got both release and grip.
Oh, it's so different, isn't it?
You've got release and grip on that? Because I reckon as you're turning...
Well, no, you've got release and grip on every single channel.
Yeah, exactly. So there's release being a part of it, and that's why I think Ryan's pushing that channel idea where he's kind of exploring that relationship between release and grip, more than like traditional channels have done in the past, which is why it's quite exciting.
The thing that channels do with release is they're
directional, so
yeah. So they pour you into the release, and some other boards, or for example, let's just take a really classic design like a wide swallowed tail fish. Yeah. You know, like that. What's that new one out there? Everyone's talking about the Feb fish.
Oh, well, the channel one.
Yeah, definitely got some modern features, bit more rocker, single concaves, like doing the stuff that you know we in England have been doing for quite a while now, to be honest, is putting concave in fishes. But anyway, that board there, even though it's got all those modern features, because of the outline, because of the shortness of the rail, because of the fact that it's got two fins, it's loose. If he pushes that too hard, if I surf that board, I don't look like him. He knows exactly when it's going to go. So does he need a channel? No. But if I had a channel set up on that board that aided me to get to the point of release, so I felt it and I knew when it was coming, I can then utilize that. And I think that Ryan's ones, so like if you look at the FM channel, I think all that's doing is accentuating a V in the middle of the board, and it's almost telling the water, hey, you go that way, then you tip, then the V comes into place, and you've got that drag which effectively holds you longer with the release of the twinny. So that's why you have quite a drifty feel on the FM. So the Twinser fin is going to do that as well. So you couldn't almost put it down to a channel, but I think really it's a case of breaking the line of water through your turn just enough so that you've got this accentuated V that comes in as well. But it isn't necessarily there down the line because that channel's adding a bit of lift. So it's not a release point.
Well, I'm thinking like
really,
releasing
but
in the sense that the water is moving down the board, and then when it comes to that edge, it releases off the board. So you're reducing the amount of suction sort of between the water and the board. Like
adding lift in the tail,
adding lift, adding looseness. And like with the pedestrian ship, you can see where the release is coming in the middle of the deck, like halfway between them. But then where it arcs out, you can imagine as you're going around corner, it starts becoming released, and you start finding edge on it, and it starts adding grip.
Well, you start finding the V. I mean, there's no way you can have as much V as the pedestrian ship has without that massive break in the rail from the channel.
Yeah.
So like when you think about it like that, this is what I'm talking about. This is like, that's design, and at the end of it, you look at the board and there's a channel on it. It's not, here's a board, I'm going to stick some channels on it.
Yeah.
And because if you do, here's a board, I'm going to stick some channels on it, that doesn't ruin the board. People say like, oh, there's no real such thing as a bad board, but you are going to close the window on where it feels good and where you can really utilize it and do your best surfing. And I've seen, as many times as I've seen channels work beautifully, pedestrian ship, it makes so much sense in this crazy way. And actually, since that video, we put that video out, lots of people were directing me to some other channel bottom shapers, and I've been reading loads about this kind of shape. And the in-cut channel and the depth of it and what you're putting it on, they make a lot of sense. A lot of people have been doing them a long time, and Ryan's just took inspiration off some other shapes, and he knew some things that Rasta really liked. It's so clever. It's so clever. Rasta's been on performance 20s for longer than anyone, and Ryan knew that, and I think he did his research and knew what he liked, because Rasta's ridden some stuff from Gary McNeil that's quite similar.
It's interesting, because my experience with channels is that they give too much driving control in UK conditions. Like
100%. Fistral the other.
Yeah.
Can I shout out my mate quickly?
Yeah, of course.
Marky Lascelles. Gonna go see him in a minute. Actually, I borrowed my friend Paris's board and rode one of your shapes, and I thought it was too small for me. It's a 6'5" twin pin, and I would never set up a twin fin that size for me. I had such a fun surf on it in the UK, but really good waves. And what I found, that it was quite an offshore day. Yeah. So the drive that the channels were giving me was just enough to like sort of plow me into enough speed to do turns. So, and when I did the turns, it was almost sticking me to the face a little bit. It felt amazing. Felt really nice. So in the right conditions in the UK.
And that's what I was going to say, is like...
But the board was small. In nature, I would have thought the board was too small, but it ended up being a really happy accident of like a narrow board with not much pivot in the outline that I might have overpowered slightly with the offshores and the kind of really good shaped wave and the twin and the channel. Like it was like everything came together, and I'm like, wow, this feels...
He's going to say we're going to I was in Fat Mushy Day.
Well, I think in Fat Mushy Days it'd be too small for me, because I did find it a little bit hard to paddle as well, but again, that was offshores. But in Fat Mushy Days, my ability would have been stretched, because it would have been bogging me down and slowing me down a bit.
And that's what I found, is like when it's not optimal, you don't have the looseness to really kind of hustle the board along. I felt too locked into it. Like I found them like way more effective at kind of controlling that line and keeping you sort of like working like a third fin than I was expecting. I was expecting twin fin looseness with just a little bit more kind of drive maybe, but like actually it was
especially if you're not really sort of like mobile in your weight distributions, and I'm not. I'm quite
back foot and you're really trying to power it through.
Well, you like driving off your back foot. If you're sat on your back foot, which is like, it's funny actually, my son sits on his back foot, I sit on my back foot, and that's probably our strongest points and also our weakest points. So like boards like that, they'll come into effect quite heavily on poor waves for people like us. And that's why Luke Dillon, no offence, Luke is like one of the best surfers from the UK, but if you put him on something like that, those sort of setups, he won't be able to do what he does, because the board's not going to be there when he needs it to be. So you do need to be good at transitioning your weight, or like shuffling up the board slightly, and you need to be better, I think, to really utilise them. And I was going to say, the side piece. So the side piece doesn't have the channels.
Yeah.
That's why I feel like it's like that all-rounder for Fistral, and
it makes sense.
Yeah, because you really feel the. But we've taken it out in massive waves, and it's hard work.
You can see you have to nurse it a bit more.
Yeah, for sure. And then like I took it to Miller. I took it to a beep I took it to a left-hand reef up the coast. I went a million miles an hour. And if I'd have had channels then,
you'd have had a bit more,
and maybe slightly less rocker, I'd have probably been able to do better surfing. It still felt really good, to be honest, but it was loose. It is my point. So channels then, they come into effect.
But then I think you're making a case, is like, get a twin fin with the option of putting in a little trailer, because that's almost the ability to kind of add or remove the channel effect a little bit.
Yes and no, because you then move you're moving the fins up to accommodate it. So
no, that's what I'm saying. Keep them pure twin.
Yeah, but add a fin.
Like a knobster in the back there.
Well, how about this though? Set up a whole model range
right,
and add channels if it makes sense. Like Malcolm Campbell told me that Bonza isn't about his shapes. He said, dude, I've been shaping the same shapes for 30 years because that's all people order off me. You can put a Bonza bottom on any shape.
Yeah.
Any rocker, any outline, any thickness and foil, they'll work. They'll do what Bonzas do on anything. He said it's just an option. He's like, people don't grumble about putting 5 fins in, do they? Why grumble? So why not have a side piece? If you want to use it in more point breaky waves, or if you know, whatever, you're going to Indo, but you want that kind of feel, then you take the side piece, you add some channels to it, and you maybe, have it a 1/4 inch narrower, and and then you've got the setup. It's still the side piece, but with the channels, and it's the same as taking channels off something. Maybe you've got something and it's set up for the majority of the channels. There's nothing wrong with taking them. It's not going to ruin the board.
I guess my thinking was the ability to add and then remove a fin gives you more flexibility in the board. So if you've only got one board, like the point being is the channels is quite a permanent fixture. Which is a challenge, unless you really specifically want that.
I don't think we're arguing here. I think it's the same. Not at all. It's the same thing, but a fin is more about the pivot.
Yeah.
And the transition after the transition, but the channels is the transition.
Yeah.
So once you've done your transition, you're back onto quite a big fin.
Yeah.
So like, do you remember when I was doing those fin tests?
No, yeah.
Yeah, and I had the best turn I did was power twins in the side and a large middle. Think how much fin that is.
Yeah.
If you could get off the top without getting stuck and slowing down too much, you would come down that face with so much hold, drive and speed. Off the bottom, you felt like blooming, Oki at J-Bay.
I know what you mean. The fin gives you that kind of, it's a focal point of pivot and also release, because when you lose it, it suddenly goes, whereas with the channels, it's a more consistent...
More transitional, yeah. So it is a different feeling.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah.
So in theory, I guess why not just always put a middle box in?
Yeah, there's definitely a case for that.
I don't know the answer. Or why not do what we're doing with the BP and put in the adapt setup? So you've got a thruster setup, a 2+1 setup, or a twin. Yeah. Like, to me, that is UK gold. And then someone says, well, what about quads? And you go, yeah, fine, because quads are basically like slightly easier to control twin fins with a bit more drive. On paper, they're better, but still.
What we haven't tested is the twins or adapt setup, because I think twinsers and quads have a sort of similarity.
They're like wolves and dogs.
Yeah.
I do think that where a wave lacks power, then less drag is lovely. But then I do think that you need to do something to that board to allow for pivot. And in theory, if we've said all we've said, a twin fin channel bottom should work well in the UK, but we know from experience that if you put them on twin pins, it feels draggy and a bit boring. Yeah. So stuff like the pedestrian ship and stuff like chili wrap, things like that, adding channels to them could really everyman a really easy to surf board with lots of lift and lots of speed. So it's something we've got to think about more. But I just felt like this video, when you listen to what a channel bottom is from other videos out there and other information out there, you watch it and then you go away and you go, so what do channels do again? So I feel like we've pragmatically broke it down to like the meat and potatoes of what they are. That they're a design element that you can take or leave, and you've got to make sure if you have them on your board that it's widening the window of that board being better, not smalling it. That's basically where it lies.
I think that point at the end is the key one, because the number of conversations I've had with people because they call up and go, I want this board, and channels. And I'm like, okay, why do you want the channels? And it's like, because I've seen that board, it looks great. And it kind of, in your head, it makes sense. It gives you all this kind of grip. And quite often you actually then have a chat with them and say, well, this is how it's going to affect the board, this is how it's going to handle. And they start thinking, oh, maybe I don't want the channels, because I think there's definitely a trend element to them where people see it and they get, because they look cool, they look fast, they look like going faster stripes in a way, but like they're not aesthetic, they have a serious impact.
They're beautiful.
On the effect, yeah.
And I like all the different types. I mean, I tend to prefer shallower channels and like flatter V banks.
Yeah.
And I think that's because we're naturally in weaker waves.
Yeah.
So like, you know what I mean? So I'm always in my mind, even as a shaper, even like, if you ask me why I was finishing the channels there.
You don't want extreme lines, you want it softer.
But then I can see why like someone who's living in powerful beach breaks and point breaks is putting deeper ones in like Axel. Naturally, it makes sense. So these are design elements that make a lot of sense. They aren't just novel
That's it, they're not
add-ons.
very faster stripes. You've got to
No, but they can be used as it and bought as it and sold as it quite often. The other one is you know, the belly channels. So we had this model called the Shank, which we worked on for years, and it was basically single concave, low wide points, wider tail, and more drawn out curve. And when you put all of those things together, you had this quite a soupy board, but it lacked drive. If you put it against the fresh blade iterations through the years and what that's become. What that was when we were first making the Shank, which was, I can't remember what it was called, it had the word fresh in it, mad fresh maybe. You would lose drive, but you definitely have this, like, what I like about surfing is like the smooth transit. It's nothing like, it's like, whoosh. So when we added belly channels to that, it was like the perfect storm. And we did that around about the time that Mick was at J-Bay. So when we watched him at J-Bay with the channel boards, we were like, what the hell, he's copying us. At J-Bay, we're at Fistral. And there was a bit of there was a trust in it, that it was a design element, and we're like, here we go. And we put it on the model, and slowly you started seeing people, I don't know about that, because it came out of...
I was going to say, because we don't have the channels on the anymore. Did you take it off because people weren't getting it?
Yeah, so I offer it. When I'm customizing that board, I say, look, if you add belly channels to this, gives you a bit more drive. You can sort of, kind of
front foot drive, back foot release, basically.
Yeah, and if you need that, that's the option of the board. But if you don't, I mean, it's still a really nice board, especially if you've got any form of power. So what we found in the end was that people moved to the Rockstar in weaker waves, and better waves, people either were absolutely fine with not needing that drive because you've just got a mobile effect, or they were a bit front foot heavy and powerful, and they kind of opted for the channels because they'd already ridden them before. But it was very much a voguey kind of, you know, in and out. It wasn't about the design, it was more about the acceptance of it being weird, like twinnies and twinsers, and, you know, 10 years ago twinsers. Yeah, mid-lengths, I mean, that took a while, didn't it? How many people do you know that were like, no, I'm never getting mid-length, and now they're like, got a mid-length.
I was talking to a guy in his 60s today, and he's like, we've never had it so good. We've never had it so good. 20 years ago, I wouldn't be able to find one board for like kind of, that would suit me now. But like, now in your 50s, 60s, you're just like, surfing's never, in terms of the options they've got, it's all kind of like geared up. But yeah, maybe channels will be like that in another 20 years.
They'll fall out of favour somehow, but they'll never stop working. And that's, you know, that is one of the key takeaways to channels adding or taking away on a design board. It's not about a board being good, bad, right, wrong. It's the window in which you can just use it and feel expressive and have fun. Yeah. Like, that is it. Anyway, I've got to go because it's Friday and my kid wants to surf and I've got to go and pick up some blanks. So have a nice weekend, everybody, and new video coming soon.